Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is a series that I'm starting, just talking about this speech that I did my junior year because I really want to cite, I think it's a good speech with information, but it wasn't well done. I think it needs to be corrected a bit. So without further ado, let's get into part two. Um, as explained by, this is actually the first part where, I think one of the only parts where my information is cited. As explained by Alexandrian High Priest Brian Cain, there are four definitions of the word witch. The Anglo-Saxon language gave us much of our modern English language. The word witch comes from the Old English word for the wise people, spelled W-I-C-C-A. This word, often pronounced Wicca, is the old word for a male witch. However, today we mispronounce this word as it would have been pronounced by the Saxons as Wicca. Where W-I-C-C-A means a male witch, W-I-C-C-E means a female witch. As English today is not a gendered language, we can take off the A and the E at the end of the old words and we're left simply with witch. This is the oldest definition of the word witch we have. Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. Next definition. I think it's pretty straightforward. Next, we have the definition used by witch hunters in the persecution days. This definition was a person, typically female, who practiced dark magic, poisoned people of power, murdered children, or made pacts with higher power at the crossroads, that higher power being Diana, the goddess of the moon, or the devil. So, I mentioned in my first video, my introduction video, that I stumbled upon that channel Hex Education. I was gonna say Hex Fest. Hex Fest is a festival that they host in New Orleans. Hex Education. They run a kind of podcast. I don't know what to call it, but it's a video stream that goes on weekly. And they just finished season 4 a few months ago. Iconic. But one of the hosts, he's a translator, so he is very good at just everything. He's incredibly intelligent. But one of the things he pointed out in a video I just watched, because I've been going back and rewatching, I can't remember the exact translation, but I want to say it's like Deanna something Paganis. I'd have to look it up in that video and double check. But essentially the translation is Diana, the last goddess of the pagans. So sometimes witches would be seen as worshiping the devil, but a lot of times they were seen as worshiping Diana, who is the goddess of the moon. And the church was more afraid of Diana than they were of the devil, actually. Which, love that, because I really do think it's scarier to worship a woman than to worship the devil. Yeah. In Deuteronomy 18:10, it is stated, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, casts spells, is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead." This is one example of the Bible condemning what they believed witchcraft to be. Witches do not perform the sacrifice of any living being. We sacrifice the power raised in a magic circle, and the power comes from our bodies and flowing blood. Witches do, however, practice divination, interpretation of omens, and sometimes even consult the dead. But one must remember that the Jewish and Christian priesthood practice exactly what is being condemned in that passage. In both religions, we see successful prophets delivering their prophecies, which is divination. Prayers to the saints, the angels, or to Mary and Jesus are all ways of consulting the dead. To continue with the witch hunters, it is very obvious after doing any in-depth research into the trials that these men hunting down witches were often very vile and sadistic men who would get off on torturing these women and abuse their power to do what they wanted. So this whole bit on Deuteronomy 18:10, my information comes from Janet and Stuart Farrer. They were initiated by Alexander's. Well, I can get more into initiation. The dog is barking. I apologize. But Janet was initiated by Alex. I can't remember the name of Stuart's initiator, but it was not Maxine. It's a common misconception that he was initiated by Maxine. He was not. And she explains that. There's this interview with them, Janet and Stuart, and they're talking about Deuteronomy 18:10, because someone poses a question. I can put the link to it in the description. And where is it? So Janet is talking about the prophets and prophetesses delivering prophecies, which is divination. So that's something that she said. And then Brian Kane, who was talking about these 4 definitions, there's a video on the Hex Education channel talking about sacrifice and witchcraft, blood sacrifice and witchcraft, basically saying that we don't do it. And he's talking about the sacrifice of power, because power is raised in the circle, and that power is sacrificed to the gods. That is, I can never remember the difference between theurgy and thaumaturgy, but I'm pretty sure theurgy is worship magic, thaumaturgy is earthly magic, like spell work. Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say for that section. Moving on from the persecution days, we have the English definition of witchcraft. This can most prominently be seen when English colonizers came through Africa. Africa is full of various religious traditions with their own forms of folk magic. These colonizers were white, Christian Englishmen who knew only their English word witch, and labeled every folk tradition as witchcraft. Even outside the craft, one should be able to see just how wrong this is. These native religions are not English, nor are they Christian. They all have deep and beautiful histories, and if you go to these people practicing these traditions, if you actually speak to them, you'll realize they do not want to be called witches, and they do not want their tradition to be called witchcraft. They want to use their native language and the words they chose. If you think about these Englishmen labeling any person who practiced magic as a witch, it is no different than calling every red sauce ketchup. It's just not accurate. So this section, again from Brian Kane, what he is the one who said, if you go to these people and talk to them, they don't want to be called witches and they don't want their tradition to be called witchcraft. He said that. I kind of copied what he said because I thought it was really well worded. And then when I say it's no different than calling every red sauce ketchup, I can't remember who said that. But it was either Levi Rowland or the other priest I mentioned who did the response video to BuzzFeed. But he was like, it's no different than calling every red sauce ketchup or every green sauce wasabi. It's not accurate. And I thought that was really well worded, so I put that in there and didn't cite it. So finally, we have the British traditional witchcraft definition. This is the most accurate definition, beginning with the New Forest Covenant in Britain and High Priest Gerald Gardner. In traditional witchcraft, there is a basic structure to the practice. There is a magic circle where the worship takes place, there is a high priest and a high priestess, and a system of 3 degrees of initiation among the coven members. In this magic circle, the witches invoke the god and goddess of the craft. Ritual celebrations take place every month at the full moon and about every month and a half for rituals following the yearly cycle. These witches are members of a priesthood following the practices of the ancient people of the world. So I say this is the most accurate definition. Today I wouldn't say that, because if you are, maybe I would, but there are people who practice magic and call themselves witches, and I feel like to say that this is the most accurate definition, that is incredibly invalidating to their practice. saying that it's not witchcraft. It's not our brand of witchcraft or my brand of witchcraft, but that doesn't mean it's invalid. I do get to the New Forest. I can explain New Forest Coven when I get there, and Gerald Gardner more in a later video, later in the speech. In traditional craft, there's basic structure. There is a lot that goes on in the Alexandrian Gardnerian traditions, so I think that would have to be covered in a separate video, and probably would be better covered by someone who's not an actual initiate. But I can talk on what I know. Ritual celebrations take place every month at the full moon and about every month and a half for rituals following the yearly cycle. So the ritual celebrations at every full moon are called esbats. And I believe I read somewhere that esbat can also be a term used to describe the weekly meetings, because most covens, especially Alexandrian covens, will meet weekly, sometimes like even more than weekly, because Alexandrians are very well trained. Most of them are. And then for every month and a half, those are called sabbats. The 8 sabbats, very popular. I can do a video about the sabbats too. They're the holidays. They're following the solstices and equinoxes, because I don't like this phrase, but it's, I guess, earth-based. But it follows the sun. And then the esbats, the full moon celebrations, follow the moon. So, and then I think that's all I have for this section. And then I'll continue in a later video. Until then, blessed be.